everyone, and welcome to our community conversation series. My name is Liz. So essentially, the series is an opportunity to discuss developments that are happening within the internet computer ecosystem. Today is very exciting because it's our first ever community conversation with someone with some wonderful external community members and former Dfinity team members of cycledao. So Arthur and Norton, could you guys give a brief intro of yourselves and how you came to hear about Dfinity and the internet computer?
I've been a Dfinity fan from way back. I think I first interviewed Dom in like 2014 while he was ripping on Ripple, and then gradually kind of saw, literally all he had to say was negative stuff about crypto. It was hilarious. And then, but it was really influential. And then eventually I managed through various podcasts, watched Dfinity move from a twinkle in his eye that produced the internet computer. So I've always been a fan and done a bunch of podcasts, used to work for Consensus. And now I'm kind of a Dfinity community member, just trying to get this internet computer ecosystem up and running.
Awesome. Thank you, Arthur. And Norton, tell us a little bit about yourself. You know, what's your background? How did you hear about Dfinity and the internet computer? And what are you up to nowadays within the ecosystem?
Yeah, so I mean, I've been in the blockchain space for quite a while. I did some Bitcoin stuff. I did some enterprise stuff. And then one day I was at the Stanford, one of the Stanford conferences, and I met the team there. And I had heard about Dfinity from like podcasts and stuff. And I was like, oh, this technology is really interesting. So then I talked to the team and ended up getting a job there. So I worked on some of the SDK. And then nowadays I am using some of the tools that I helped build to just experiment and build cool things on the internet computer.
Yeah, that's it's really awesome to hear. So is it really different for you guys to be on the other side of it, you know, versus working from within the Dfinity Foundation? Arthur and Norton?
Yeah, it's great. It's awesome. It's fantastic. The great thing about moving from working within an organization on a project to outside of an organization is you get to define the way that you do the work rather than fit within this large organizational framework. So it's fantastic. I'm more productive than I ever was at Dfinity outside of it. And maybe I'm being unfair on myself, but it feels really, really great.
Yeah, for sure. I remember when I was at Dfinity, I often worked on just random side projects. Like I wanted to do this little thing, or I wanted to build this little, component. And now I get to do that. And I guess people like my work. So it's kind of cool.
No, both of you, your contributions have been invaluable within the internet computer ecosystem. And I think the cool thing about this space is that it is decentralized, right? So it's not so the way in which you contribute to the overall ecosystem doesn't have to be dictated by a centralized entity. So let's talk about cycledao. What is cycledao? Where did the idea come from? And what are its objectives?
Well, I'll go first. I think the idea kind of had its genesis in just a kind of loose conversation between Harrison Hines of Fleek, Norton, and myself about what the internet computer needed. And it needed independent organizations that could participate in governance, develop the community, have a more diverse culture than what Dfinity itself has cultivated, which obviously is highly research organization focused, extremely top down. That's just not going to work anymore. So the idea that was where it came from. The kind of vision for it has been to provide governance support, startup and ecosystem support, and potentially research. We'll see how things go and how things unfold. I don't know, Norton, you've got a bunch to add to that, I'm sure.
Yeah, I think for me, this whole idea came together when you just messaged me on Telegram, being like, "Hey, let's do some DAO stuff together for this platform that's launching." And I was like, "Okay, sure." And I guess here we are now. And one of the things that was missing from the ecosystem at launch was really like, I need this thing to be built so I can build this other thing. Like, who is building this? And there's no way to really coordinate. There's no way to figure out. And so, yeah, one of the, I guess, like sort of byproducts or goals of having this group of people together is now we can just organize and we can say, oh, are you working on DAO stuff? Okay, I don't need to work on DAO stuff. Fleek is doing, wallet stuff, so I don't need to do wallet stuff. So it's just easier organizationally to like build up the infrastructure.
So Arthur and Norton, what do you see the role of cycledao is within the overall internet computer ecosystem?
I think the kind of fundamental need that the ecosystem has is for independent voices, right? Like, I think the most important thing we can do right now, and this is probably something we can have further conversation about, is participate in governance, but then also to help coordinate that ecosystem development that Norton Wang was just talking about.
Yeah, for sure. So on like the topic of governance, right? One of the big issues at launch was like, okay, we had this whole cool decentralized governance system, but like we could only follow Dfinity or the Internet Computer Association, which is basically Dfinity. And so like, who are the other independent entities? And that piece was missing. So yeah, I mean, that we stepped up and tried to build up that independent voice. And yeah, here we are. Now we have a follow target.
To paraphrase one of my favorite British reality TV shows, it is early days in terms of the internet computer ecosystem. And I totally agree that for the internet computer ecosystem to be successful, we need to have just like this huge range, this huge spectrum of other voices as it pertains to governance. You are correct that right now, in terms of discoverability, it's really only the IC and Dfinity Foundation, but with cycledao, my personal hope at the very least is that this will set precedent for the community at large so that other individuals and other groups that represent various interest groups within the community are able to also participate in governance and have equal standing when it comes to the NNS. So in terms of cycledao, let's say, you guys, let's say there's like a proposal that's up for voting. How do you guys decide as a group what direction you want to go toward? Like, is there like a sync? Is there like a telegram? Like, how do you guys get on the same page with what you want in terms of the direction of the internet computer?
Well, there's what we do right now, which is literally just talk in our own little private telegram and look at the needs of the computer, the kind of internet computer community. We'll come to this a little bit when we talk about the survey we did before, about a month ago. But to be honest, there needs to be a proper procedure for submitting proposals to the NNS that is observed by all organizations, including Dfinity. That doesn't exist right now. So, while we can create follow targets, Dfinity has a lot of work to do to actually make it possible for people to for organizations like cycledao to meaningfully participate in governance. I would say right now we're very limited in our ability to meaningfully participate in the NNS, as is everyone, because Dfinity hasn't built the procedures and processes for us to do so. So that's what I'd say about how we make these decisions. Norton?
Yeah. I would say that the team has done a great job of starting that process with all of the forum posts and then the methodology, I guess, in the process for basically moving a roadmap item from discussion phase to NNS proposal phase to, I guess, implementation phase. And that's great to see. And hopefully we'll see, continued refinement along that front.
Completely. And, at the end of the day, Dfinity Foundation is not supposed to be the sole contributor or the sole voice as it pertains to the NNS, as it pertains to decision-making within the internet computer ecosystem. And again, my hope is that through cycledao and through other DAOs and other various community formed collectives and entities that we're able to see more influence coming from these different directions. So let's say, I'm a community member, I'm interested in supporting cycledao, and I want to configure my neuron to follow CycleDAO's voting decisions. How do I, where do I read up on this? Where do I find out how to support CycleDAO in terms of governance?
Sure. So let me actually share my screen right now. Okay, cool. So this is the CycleDAO website, cycledao.xyz. And so you'll find a very brief summary of, what we're trying to do. In terms of actually configuring your neuron to follow us, so you would go here, click on this, and that links to our Axon page. And then you would just grab this neuron ID right here. So this 596 or this 596. We don't really have a step-by-step guide on how to set your follow targets in the NNS. But yeah, all of our voting decisions can be seen here. All of the details of who we're following and how much stake is in our neuron, that sort of thing. You can see here.
Cool. And in terms of historical voting decisions of CycleDAO, have you guys voted on anything already? Do you guys have if you think about protocol politicians, do you guys have a certain platform? How do people think about the way you vote and the issues that are important to you guys?
There hasn't been much to vote on, to be honest. Think of those roadmap items, that have come up. I mean, we've seen the only one that's been executed was the enabling support for the Windows, biometric stuff. I mean, yeah, let's do that. There hasn't been much to actually vote on. In fact, I think a lot of this talk about voting and this protocol politician stuff, it's going to take a while before we actually come across something where there's going to be actual contention, right? Dfinity knows how to build a great protocol. We've seen that. So yeah, I mean, there's just not much to vote on. A lot. I mean, we've got tens of thousands of proposals, but that have passed, but they've all been just basic maintenance proposals. So I mean, maybe there'll be opportunity in the future, but yeah, we just haven't had anything to vote on yet.
Yeah. So one that I'm looking forward to is the increased canister storage. So I think that's going to go into NNS proposal phase. So we're probably going to support that. I mean, it seems like everybody wants it. I want it. So that's one of those things where yes, there's a decision to be made here, but it's a pretty obvious decision. I am interested to see, if there are more controversial things that we need to opine on in the future, choosing between item A or item B, and there are trade-offs for both. And then, the community is split. Then we'll actually have to, conduct more research and figure out what the right answer is, I guess.
Completely. And I totally hear where you guys both are coming from. And I think one thing that's happening in terms of just the internet computer network overall is that for basically up until launch, everything was within the purview of Dfinity Foundation. We were working on releasing this platform, but now that it's live, it's not really just about the Dfinity Foundation anymore, right? Nor should it be. So Arthur, I totally hear what you're saying in terms of voting and difficulty in following the different proposals and so on and so forth. But in terms of the trajectory of decentralization over time, we hope to see, us moving closer and closer to this platonic ideal of decentralization. And that is something that we're very heavily focused on, which is why we've released the roadmap, which is why we are looking to incorporate community input into all of these things that we're working on. But certainly, if anyone here, either, Norton or Arthur or anyone who's on the call or part of the community has suggestions for what we could do better or what the Internet Computer Network could do better overall as a community, certainly happy to hear it. And I think things will look a lot different, a couple months down the line even. So Arthur and Norton, let's say that there are community members who are looking to do what CycleDAO is doing, but to form their own sort of collective or their DAO. Do you have any suggestions or best practices for how they can go about it?
So I would say if you want to have a neuron that you can control as a group, there's this cool piece of software. It's called Axon. You can just go here and create your own Axon. And you can do, let's say, if you have 3 people in your organization, you can just give all 3 of them voting rights, and then they can create proposals which will manage that neuron. And so you could decide, you could change the different governance parameters, you could change the voting policies, whatever. It's pretty flexible. And this will allow you to have more of the actual DAO and voting functionality in this nice UI. At some point in the future, we'll have the service nervous system, which theoretically has all the same functionality, probably more functionality than what Axon offers. And also it works at a different layer. But until then, this is sort of an application level, just meta governance system.
Is it safe to use with a large amount of money?
Maybe. I'm not exactly sure. So this is experimental software. There's bugs discovered all the time. I use it to manage some of my stake. I know some early seed investors are using it as sort of the only UI that's available. So yeah, if you're comfortable using experimental, very alpha software, go for it.
Cool. Thank you so much, Norton. And this is certainly something that the community has been asking for quite some time. So, if it wasn't clear to the participants, Axon is a neuron management tool. Norton or Arthur, do you want to talk about, I actually love this. Do you want to talk about where the name came from?
So in the brain, there are a bunch of cells. Some of them are neurons, right? And then the way neurons communicate with each other is through this thing called the axon. As far as I know, I'm not a biologist, but yeah, the idea is that axons control neurons. And so here, you can have one axon that controls a bunch of neurons, right?
Cool. And why did you create such a tool?
So 2 primary use cases that I was designing for. One is for us as cycledao, right? For what I described earlier, we have a bunch of people that want to control how a neuron votes together. The other is for seed investors, and seed investors sort of don't have any great tooling. It's all command line. It's not very approachable for a lot of people. And so with Axon, you can just click a few buttons, run a few commands, and then you can see all of your seed neurons on one page.
That's super awesome. Do you want to give us a little walkthrough in terms of how it works?
Sure. Yeah, so I am on the cycledao neuron itself. So let's say I wanted to, I don't know, well, let's see what I can do, right? So I have this delegated neuron here. So this is the actual follow target. If I wanted to tell it to follow, I don't know, KYC for the Internet Computer Association, I would just click a few buttons right here. It's pretty self-explanatory. And then I submit this proposal. So this is not an NNS proposal. This is a Axon proposal. The voters of this Axon proposal are the members of cycledao, right? So here we have it set to, we need 2 total votes to accept this. And so as soon as someone else from the DAO accepts this proposal, then this neuron, the cycledao neuron, will then execute this NNS proposal, which is to follow the ICA for this topic. And so this is just one type of action that you can do. You can also, let's say I want to change the visibility to private, or I want to change the policy such that we need 3 votes to pass, right? So this is all possible. And yeah, everything just goes through the standard proposal and voting process. And yeah, I think that's pretty much it.
Cool. Yeah, no, this is a really, really awesome tool. I have personally used it, and I think everything that Norton creates, the UI and UX is just really beautiful. So I would highly recommend this to anyone who is interested in a neuron management interface. So if people are interested in becoming more hands-on with cycledao, how do they join, and who are the current members?
Membership's not really open, Liz. It's kind of really, it's a bit of a club. and so, I mean, the great thing to do is just to get on our mailing list. I pump a newsletter out. Sometimes it gets more attention. Some weeks it gets more attention than others. When we actually have stuff going on where we can involve people, then that will be the avenue we reach out through that, and also our Twitter, which also is not receiving too much love right now, largely because we're pretty busy. Yeah, I mean, there's not a lot that we can engage the community over at the moment. I mean, as you've seen, like, we've been building out infrastructure for ourselves before we can even start doing, getting more community engagement.
Yeah. One of the things that we originally set out to do, right, was to be sort of like a venture fund, right, to be able to collect a bunch of ICP and then invest in other projects. And what is sort of preventing us from doing that more broadly is the restriction on canisters being able to send ICP. And so, yeah, it's a bit difficult to do any sort of crowdfunding until that restriction is lifted. But after that happens, then, I hope to do much more things and have it more open.
Completely. And, with regards to things like, canisters not being able to hold ICP, I would say, because the internet computer ecosystem is community driven, if there's a proposal around that topic and if it's voted upon and passed by the community, then that's something that would happen. And I know right now the process is not super clear in terms of submitting proposals and understanding proposals via the NNS DApp, but I would say that this is just one snapshot in time. And again, the trajectory in which we're moving in is definitely to move closer and closer to that of an ideal of decentralization, whatever that might mean. And I think it means different things to different people, but certainly that is our goal. So something I also wanted to hear more from you guys about is that CycleDao aims to be the lens from which community members can reflect their interests and have that appear in the governance process of the internet computer. So Arthur and Norton, I know that there was a community survey that you guys put together and had circulated a couple of weeks back. So do you want to speak to that? Who had participated? What were some general themes that you had seen? How do you plan on incorporating this information with some of the future actions of CycleDao?
Sure, yeah, I can speak to that. So, I mean, a little while back, there was this massive social media storm, a lot of misery around, it was around the time when, about a month after launch, people were really frustrated. The seed rounders were really frustrated that their tokens had been locked up in neurons, rightly so. In general, there was a major issue, and that was who had access to early tokens. Dfinity wasn't speaking to the fact. There were pretty good reasons for that fact, and for the reason they weren't speaking to it, and I'm not going to speak to it now either. But non-nefarious. But nonetheless, there was a lot of vitriol in the community, and it found itself just spewing out on social media. So the idea was, can we actually codify this into an evidenced document that describes what the issues that the community has right now are, and so that was the driving force behind it. It wasn't easy to do though. Just even finding the right questions to ask was pretty difficult. So I interviewed a whole bunch of community members, specifically targeting ones that appeared disaffected. I asked them 4 questions that they'd like to be asked, which is a really strange thing to ask a person, and assembled a questionnaire with about 30 questions in it. They were split into questions around launch and questions around the NNS. Now, I never actually published any kind of content based on the responses to the NNS questions, largely because it was a lot of work just doing the launch stuff. There was huge frustration. Most of it was around opacity, and Yeah, well, most of it was just around opacity and the lack of engagement with the community around decisions that were made to do with vesting and things like that. But then, yeah, things like the roadmap was like a major issue. I think roadmap was brought up like 60 times. Actually, interestingly, only about 20 responses came through, and I got that survey in front of about 60 people. So one clear result was profound apathy, I would say. People were very apathetic, largely because they felt offended and mistreated by the Dfinity organization itself. So I spoke to, I got all these results, and I processed them into a general summary, and I shared it with Michael Lee. And I worked with him on producing a report that was not quite so brutal as some of the responses that came through in that survey. And then we also talked about how to respond to those. One thing that you found was a lot of people have all these ideas about how they think Dfinity could resolve the situation. But if you actually listen to their complaints and look at the ideas they have to resolve the issues that have caused their complaints, they often don't actually match up. So you've got to be kind of creative about how you respond to these things. Ultimately, it was pretty simple. There wasn't a whole lot that needed to be done. There was some transparency that just couldn't happen for compliance reasons. That it's strange to me that people don't understand that there's some basic compliance reasons, and if there's a real obvious and easy to answer question that isn't being answered, there's probably a compliance reason behind it. But nevertheless, the other thing was the roadmap. And I spoke with, Michael Lee and I spoke a lot about how to best respond with a roadmap. Ultimately, what was published was exactly the most comprehensive roadmap, response that the community was asking for. So while I think that was already on the cards, the way that it was expressed was by Dfinity, was informed by the survey. We also did some work on other stuff that ultimately it was decided not to publish, which was very disappointing. But the work did take place at Dfinity in response to that survey. As far as cycledao and how we can respond, there's not much we can do. The most important thing, because we're small fish, right? The biggest, the 10-ton gorilla in the room is Dfinity and all of its related organizations. So the best cycledao can do at the moment is just influence those organizations. There's willingness there. And so, that's just what we did. I'm trying to think, there's got to be one other thing. The final thing is, when people get mad, right, they spout off a whole bunch of stuff on social media, and it's totally unproductive. The way to approach actually having an influence on a beast like the internet computer is to establish a basis of evidence. In the case of the survey, it was the survey itself. Process that evidence into something that can be easily consumed. Whenever you're gathering data, you always wind up with a huge amount of information, and that cannot be absorbed on its own. It has to actually be processed. So turning that into a report, publishing that report so that this entire process is taking place in the clear. If not publishing the entire report, publishing a summary of it that is true to the content, and then engaging in a productive way with whatever organization you're trying to influence, in this case, Dfinity. That's the way you have to do things. You have to structure your engagement. You can't just whinge on social media. That was what led to doing that survey. And that's the thing that I really want that the community can do for itself, right? If you go out, do a big survey, process that and evidence it, evidence you're working and simplify the message and then deliver it. That is the way to make change. That's the way to make things happen. Not just getting angry on Reddit and Twitter.
Completely. And I also want to say that, in 6 months' time, a year's time, hopefully, there are other players other than CycleDAO, which are basically the main voices within the internet computer ecosystem, and that it's not really just the ICA and Dfinity Foundation. But looking towards CycleDAO, what would you say are like your metrics of success where in a year's time, you can be like, okay, we did a really good job at CycleDAO, or, we missed the mark on something. Like, what would you use to gauge that?
Well, there's a roadmap now. So whatever we did to help that come about, whether that was coming along or not, perhaps we can credit ourselves slightly with that. I don't know. But I guess like really it just comes down to like how many other voices there are. How like you asked the question of like what are the measures of decentralization for some network? You would look at like Gini coefficients, right, of distribution of the tokens, or like who are the whales that influence these votes, right? And so if we can help to bring those numbers like in the right direction, I would consider that a success.
And for those on the call who are unfamiliar with the Gini coefficient, can you define it?
I'm not an economist, so I can't really, but it's something to do with like, measure of inequality in a system.
Cool. No, that's definitely very helpful. Yeah, but I think it's really, really awesome. Arthur and Norton, everything that you guys have done, you're definitely, I think, the faces and the names that people think of when they think of the internet computer ecosystem. I think part of it was, all of the work that you were doing, like as part of the Dfinity team. But I would definitely say that after you guys had left and branched off, like your impact has just been like enormous and invaluable and impossible to replicate. So I thank you for all of the work that you guys have done within the ecosystem. So I know there are a lot of questions in the Q&A, so I want to give people adequate time for that. So we had posted a thread on Reddit around questions for CycleDAO. So we do have one from Reddit user T Kedit. So this person said, in community-owned and operated projects, there are aspects where group consensus is great, pooling funds, voting on day-to-day operations governance, but there are aspects where groupthink is terrible. How do you expect to resolve this dilemma in the DAO cycle? Are there aspects where the community will vote to decide in some areas which you think Dfinity Foundation will keep until the project has matured enough?
Just going back to exactly what Norton Wang said, it's all about decentralization. It's all about communities rather than like mass collectives, I mean, one thing you see decentralized social media platforms always refer to is not being global by default. Current social media is global by default, right? The sheer volume of voices is immense. If you can cut this down to individual communities and group these things rather than, tranche these little groups, they can have all the groupthink they want as long as they don't have collective groupthink. So yeah, I mean, that's the most productive response to that I can muster, I think. We need more organizations, and we need to be comfortable with those organizations having internal groupthink, but also with those organizations disagreeing productively on a global scale.
Cool. Norton, anything to add to that?
Not really. Really just like, disagreement is good if you can use it effectively. It shouldn't just be like one voice. But yeah, feel free to disagree.
Definitely. Cool. So we do have quite a few questions in the Q&A, at least 20 at this point. And for those of us on this call, feel free to continue dropping the questions within the Q&A box. Cool. So starting out with our first question. So as CycleDAO, how do you plan to fund the startup support avenue? Are there plans for a token that gets used to raise funds for projects within the IC ecosystem?
No, it's basically we're just providing the startup support ourselves. There's no funding taking place.
However, there is technically a token, right? It's our Axon of governance tokens. So there you go. Are they for sale? Nope.
Well, not yet.
Not yet.
And what is the function of the Axon token?
Allows you to vote on Axon proposals.
Awesome. Cool. And what is the difference between an Axon proposal versus an NNS proposal?
Yeah, I mentioned this earlier. The NNS proposals operate on the NNS, and then there are the things that you guys are all familiar with, like allow a verified developer to join a subnet, upgrade the subnet, all those things. Whereas Axon is just its own thing, right? So you would manage your own Axon through its proposal process.
Cool. Thanks, guys. So next question in the Q&A. Do you think CycleDAO will focus on horizontal platform tools or industry use cases?
Well, I guess like I can speak for myself. If I need a tool and no one is building it, then I build it.
And speaking of which, what are the tool? I know that you already have IC Rocks and Axon and CycleDAO, but for you guys, what are some other aspects of tooling and infrastructure that you would like to build in the near future, if any?
So actually, I am working on something that I want to release like today, which is a way for you to mint wrapped cycles from ICP. I found that in the process of building yet another new project that if I wanted to accept wrapped cycles as payment, it's pretty hard to actually get those wrapped cycles. And so what I'm building is like not a great solution, but it kind of works. It's just a way for users to essentially go through this service to send ICP to the cycles minting canister, which will mint cycles, and then wrap those cycles in either WTC or XTC and then send it back to that user. So that's one example of those things that like, I didn't really know I needed it until I needed it. And then I had to build it.
Right. And I think that's a perfect use case for building a tool, right? Like you yourself have the need and then you build it and presumably other people have that need too. So what is the use case for a wrapped cycle, Norton?
Easier to transfer to people, easier to use as a medium of exchange, right? So all the three properties of money. Wrap cycles just have them better than native cycles. Native cycles, like you can't accept from like a raw principal, you can't accept it from an account. There's just a bunch of like limitations.
And Arthur, do you have anything to add as well?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm not on the building side. I'm just on the listening to developers complain side. So the big, and to sum it all up, I guess, my perspective and my understanding of it, I just think about the open internet service development model. This is what the internet computer was built for. The idea is that and this is a platonic idea. It's not necessarily going to be expressed perfectly, but the idea is you have a whole bunch of application components, each of which is their own individual product. You build an interface for your application and plug all of those components together, and it just works. You don't have to build the components themselves. They've been built by people who came before. In order for that to even happen, a lot of plumbing needs to be built for these things to be able to communicate. So it's that plumbing is what's really important. An example of that would be like event management, right? Like one canister needs to be able to hear that an event has taken place on another canister. There needs to be a way to make that happen. How? I don't know. I'm non-technical. I've heard Hazel describe it as a topic marketplace or a pub sub thing. And I've heard it described differently by other people, but that is like one example of these kind of environment-specific infrastructure pieces that we need. Things that you wouldn't just think of off the top of your head. They're specific to the internet computer. There's a ton of them, by the way, like a ton. And there needs to be a lot of tooling built out for Matoko. Like by using a whole new language, I mean, there's so much missing from Matoko for it to be a complete solution. I don't know if that's what, I don't know if CycleDAO is going to have a hand in that, but someone's got to do it. And it's going to take a huge amount of investment, probably more than Definity is going to be able to put into it.
Yeah, I mean, it would be really cool to see something like a Matoko DAO. I see Seb in the chat, Seb of Matoko School. Maybe that's something that you'd be interested in working on. But I completely agree. I mean, for a project that's part of the open web, that's open source, and like I think innovation needs to come from a lot of different fronts simultaneously. And Definity Foundation, again, will be one contributor among many. CycleDAO will be another. And hopefully we see a ton more DAOs crop up in the near future as well. So next question from the Q&A. So a community member is asking, will CycleDAO vote on all proposals? I wouldn't want to follow a DAO that doesn't vote on all proposals because I want to maximize my rewards.
Yeah, so one of the great things about how the NNS follow graph is that we don't have to actively vote on every single proposal because we follow other neurons. Those neurons follow yet other neurons, and it's just neurons all the way down. As long as like ultimately everybody more or less follows 27 and 28, as long as they're voting on the vast majority of proposals, which are all just, pretty automated, like, low level upgrade sort of proposals, as long as that process works, then you are voting, right? Even if the people that you're following are not actively voting.
Cool. Anything to add there, Arthur?
None whatsoever.
Okay, thanks, guys. And so next question, will CycleDAO in the future also work on creating and submitting proposals to the NNS and not just voting? If so, what are your areas of interest in terms of changes that you'd like to see?
What are the changes I would like to see? Please see the thread on the forum where I posted like 6 of them.
We can definitely link to it in the YouTube. Do you want to recap the changes that you proposed for those of us?
Sure. Yeah. So they're pretty I guess commonly requested items from developers. Things like inter-canister query calls, better tooling for Matoko. What else? Just more support of system APIs or other base libraries for Matoko. Really just like these core building blocks that we as developers really need in order to make our lives easier and in order to build better applications.
I just wanted to bring something up that I just saw on the chat, which I thought was really funny and directed at Norton. So they were, the person was quoting you. They said, if I need a tool and no one is building it, I build it. 100 emoji. I said during this convo, Norton is a Chad. That's amazing. Cool. So moving on to the next question then. When CycleDAO votes, is it proportional to the members individually, or does all voting power of the neuron follow the majority of the members?
Oh, I see. Okay, yeah. So the neuron, when a neuron votes in the NNS, it's all or nothing, right? All of its voting power and then all of its followees voting, or all of its followers voting power will act in that one way. I don't think there's a way to like split up your voting power. Maybe this could be a cool feature request, but I don't think you can do that right now.
Cool. So just going down the list of questions, what is the roadmap you're looking at in terms of Axon and also in terms of CycleDAO?
Yeah, so the roadmap for Axon would be, just better support of complex neuron management. If I wanted to do like a whole bunch of different things, like I wanted to first split and then disperse, and then after 7 days, I wanted to, spawn, split, blah, 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 whatever. I wanted to make that type of workflow possible. I wanted to be schedulable, repeatable, and really just automate a lot of these processes that are really manual right now. For CycleDAO, I guess, I would love to have ICP and canisters so that we can fund things. I think that'd be pretty great.
Cool. Thanks, Norton. So one of the things I really like about our industry is that it's so interdisciplinary, right? There's economics, there's incentive design, there's computer science, there's cryptography, and everything in between. So some community member asked in the chat, would you think of DAOs like cycledao as the equivalent of a political party? What does voting as a DAO give you that voting as an individual doesn't?
I mean, voting as a DAO, it is. That's exactly it. It's just a political party. This is a democracy. A healthy democracy is a multi-party democracy. I say multi, not a dual-party democracy. So that's, I think that answers the question, right? You need to behave as a party, and you can only do that if you vote as a DAO.
Yeah, completely agree. I also have thoughts around the dual party system, but now is not the opportunity to go into that. Norton, anything to add?
I think it'd be cool at some point in the future. Maybe this is related to the Axon question. It would be to have different types of voting systems where it's not strictly like majority wins. You could have like what's it called, the stacked rank voting. I think it'd be cool. Voting by quadratic voting, just other cool voting mechanisms. Perhaps like the NNS or the SNS won't be able to support that, but we could build it on top. And I think that'd be super interesting.
Cool, thanks guys. So next question. So this is around Axon specifically. What kind of automated tests are backing Axon deployments? Are there any coverage reports we can see?
That is a great question. No.
And will there be tests in the future, or is that part of?
Will there be tests in the future? I sure hope so. Somebody needs to write those tests. Yeah, somebody really should do that.
Norton's like, I can't do everything, guys.
He can. Just he'll get around to it.
So, let's say I'm a developer and I want to contribute to Axon, how do I, is it open source? Can I do so? Norton?
Yeah, absolutely. So the GitHub is open source. The documentation is very much lacking, and that's something I need to improve. But one of the things that I discussed in the Discord, the developer Discord, is like, if you wanted to take Axon and expand upon its like DAO functionalities, right? Let's say you did want to build in quadratic voting, please fork the code and build it. And then either, merge it back upstream or launch it as a separate project. You can build your own DAO framework that's more general purpose and, just strips out the neuron management features. I would really like to see that.
Cool. So also on the topic of Axon, if Axon is a canister, is it a problem that somebody is the controller of it?
Yeah, I wonder who that controller is. Is that controller trustworthy or not? I mean, yeah, so of course we want to see like provably, an unmanipulable code, right? And we will get to that point. I think we are still just very early in like the ecosystem as a whole. Axon itself, like it's still an early prototype. At some point in the future, right, when there are automated tests, perhaps we could remove the controller from Axon and just let it be an open internet service that just lives forever.
Cool. So we're nearing the end of the questions. So if you guys have additional questions, please drop them in the Q&A. So question from the community: if we follow the cycledao neuron, how can we be confident that the cycledao neuron will vote? Are there any specific topics that you recommend we follow with cycledao neuron specifically?
Well, if you're not confident that we're going to vote, I'd suggest not following cycledao. It's a political party, and so we'll be vocal about times when we want to vote. I'd suggest that following cycledao is just the first thing you should do if you look at the, as a move to actually decentralize the internet computer ecosystem. Take a look at the people on our membership. We really, really are invested, and we really, really want to see the internet computer succeed. We've shown that we're prepared to put a ton of work into listening to the community, more work, we believe, than the Dfinity Foundation itself. We've also, it's evidence that the Dfinity Foundation is prepared to listen to us, and listen they have. We're good at communicating with the foundation, and we want the best. We're also not perfectly aligned with the foundation. We do follow them. So the only time we would ever divert from a Dfinity Foundation vote and vote against them would be in a situation where we really thought the community's interests were not being represented, or just more work could be done on a single proposal. So you can be sure, first of all, we'll vote every time because we just follow the foundation. When we disagree with the foundation, it's not going to be in a destructive fashion. It's almost certainly going to be because we think there needs to be more discussion around a proposal before it's accepted. So that's the best answer I can give you. But honestly, everyone blindly follows the foundation right now. Just take a little bit of self-actualization and follow cycledao.
My man is real deep on us. So question from the community for you guys. What projects within the internet computer ecosystem are you guys personally most excited about? You can say Axon. That's totally valid.
Well, so I like launching new projects. I seem to be pretty good at that. So I have this new thing that I'm working on, which is an NFT. This is my first NFT project. And so I'm looking forward to seeing how it plays out. Other than that, yeah, I want DeFi to exist. So I'm waiting for all of the swap protocols to launch. I'm waiting for more assets. I'm waiting for things that use the large storage capabilities or like the scheduler capabilities of the IC to do really cool things that we haven't really seen in other ecosystems, other platforms.
Cool. What about yourself, Arthur? Are there any projects that you feel particularly excited about? I know that you interview a ton of, founders and builders in the space, so you're probably most in tune with what everyone is up to.
Yeah, that's the first thing I do whenever something interesting happens is I just start interviewing people. Everyone who I've interviewed so far has been good. I'm not seeing this is never the case. I'm an optimist, so I'm always critical. I always think things can be better. I really want to see faster progress on absolutely every project that I've interviewed. They all seem credible, not equally credible, but they all do seem relatively credible. I'm really, really interested. I really like Tonic Labs. I love the work Hazel's doing. Infinity Swap also looks fantastic. Fleek, it goes without saying, is absolutely nailing it. This is not enough, by the way. This is like a tiny amount of stuff. So yeah, we need a whole lot more stuff. I'm about to interview Axon about Nuance, their blogging platform. Once that is finished, which I hope will reach maturity very quickly, I'd like to see that broadly implemented across all teams that are using the internet computer and see some kind of content economics deployed using that. It would just be a great place to start for building out valuable NFTs that are more than just collectibles like RC Punks, which I believe are a great place to start, but they kind of show capabilities. They kind of they're a cool showcase of what you can do, but they don't really dive into the depths of what is valuable about an NFT, which is the ability to represent a piece of digital content and license, right? Like one thing that we worked on at Consensus in the early days was music licensing, particularly the royalty distribution, which right now there's no effective way to manage. And artists get completely screwed over by Spotify and as do users, because no one likes Spotify. So yeah, there's a lot of cool stuff you can do with NFTs. And I think the first place we'll see that happen is with Akon's blogging platform, Nuance. What I really want to see personally is a properly built out a properly built out social media, finance integrated social media ecosystem. So I think you want to be able to build a coherent identity on social media that you can then use as a basis for your financial history. I think that's really valuable. I think that would be especially valuable in developing nations. That's what blockchain's all about, although everyone seems to have forgotten that. Everyone's all wrapped up in this NFT, DeFi kind of stuff. It's like, nah, it's about providing inexpensive financial services. That is what this actually does that's meaningful and good. And finally, on that subject, and just to get a little bit controversial, I saw that OnlyFans has banned certain types of explicit content at the behest of its payment processes. Now, there's all this talk about morality and stuff. Actually, and we don't need to go into it, the reasons for that ban is a very good reason. I think that the internet computer is a great place where the flexibility for that kind of activity can enable that kind of gray and slightly dodgy but really necessary online activity to take place to provide safety to people in these slightly more risky industries. So finally, I'd really like to see someone tackle the adult industry. Like they tried to do it with Spank Chain on Ethereum, and it was an incredible idea, but it didn't really work out. It was a bit too complicated, and I just think someone needs to have another crack at it, and it's the zeitgeist right now, so that's worth mentioning too.
Yeah, I actually saw just today that OnlyFans had reversed their decision to remove adult content due to backlash from sex workers and so on and so forth. So I'm not entirely sure in terms of how that works out with the payment processors, but they have reversed the decision due to the controversial backlash that it has received. But, to second what you're saying, Arthur, the adult industry has been a technological pioneer across like many different areas. So for example, just like being able to stream video from a bunch of different locations across the world simultaneously, online payments and so on and so forth, VR,
Thank God for that
as well. So I would say that a lot of the initial use cases of technologies that we've seen have been the adult industry, or have been games actually as well. So those are two, I would say, industries which are pioneers when it comes to nascent technologies. So we are at time. So thank you very much, Arthur and Norton of cycledao, for the lively conversation. Thank you everyone from the community for tuning in and for your wonderful questions. And we hope to see you at our next community conversation. Bye everyone.